I'm Kirk Evans. I'm a Principal Premier Field Engineer for Microsoft. In this section, we'll look at the SharePoint 2013 strategy for SharePoint Client Object Model and using RESTful applications. The SharePoint Client-Side Object Model debuted in SharePoint 2010, where it was made available via a WCF entry point named Client.svc. However, SharePoint 2010 does not support developers accessing this endpoint directly. Instead, the developer uses a client-side proxy object exposed by either a .NET assembly or a JavaScript library. It is fair to say that the client-side object model is easier to program against from a managed code solution such as C# or VB.NET than from JavaScript. And that's because managed code programs against a strongly typed object model and you experience compile time checking and much higher levels of IntelliSense. While you can also write client-side object model code using JavaScript behind pages in a SharePoint 2010 site, the code is harder to write and debug because there is not compile time checking and IntelliSense is nowhere near as rich. This architectural diagram shows how the client-side object model was used in SharePoint 2010. .NET clients program against proxy classes in Microsoft.SharePoint.Client.dll. Silverlight clients program against proxy classes in Microsoft.SharePoint.Client.Silverlight.dll. And JavaScript clients program against proxy objects that are made available through the JavaScript library sp.js. Now, in all three cases, the proxies conduct all the communication with the entry point on the web server, which is client.svc. Is not supported to directly communicate with that endpoint. So one of the most significant changes in SharePoint 2013 is that the web service entry point of client.svc service has been extended to allow for direct access via REST-based web service calls. This is a big change because it makes the SharePoint platform accessible to just about any other platform and any type of device. A significant portion of the REST-based access in SharePoint 2010 has been designed and implemented in accordance with the OData protocol. This means developers can access SharePoint content from across the internet using one of today's most popular standards. And if you don't already know about OData concepts and how to program against it, this is something you want to get up to speed on for the SharePoint 2013 release and product lifecycle. This slide above lists new areas in the SharePoint 2013 remote API that are accessible through both client-side object model and REST. This is a welcome change because most of the functionality is only available through server-side APIs in a SharePoint 2010 farm. You can also see adding this remote access is very important to the new app model because developers can no longer run code in a SharePoint environment, and so they can't access the server-side APIs. So having these endpoints available to be able to do the same type of things you would have done with server-side code provides a lot of benefit in the SharePoint 2013 app model. This architectural diagram shows how things have changed in SharePoint 2013. Client-side code can still use the client-side object model similar as it did in SharePoint 2010, but the major changes include now you can substitute the alias _API in order to reference _VTI_bin/client.svc. So it's an alias that provides you the ability to access that endpoint in an easier fashion. Client code can also access client.svc directly using REST-based HTTP requests. And much of the REST-based API is based on the OData protocol. Code which uses the client-side object model in SharePoint 2010 should migrate to SharePoint 2013 without any problems. However, when migrating from SharePoint 2013, there is quite a bit of SharePoint server functionality that was not available in the previous version. In SharePoint 2010, the product provided OData support through the web server entry point ListData.svc. The ListData.svc web service is available in SharePoint 2013. However, you should understand that it is mainly provided for backwards compatibility for older clients that are migrating to SharePoint 2013. When creating new projects for SharePoint 2013 and later, you should not be using ListData.svc. Instead, you should be using the newer remote APIs with OData support that are discussed later in this module. In this module, we introduced the Client.svc, we saw how it's exposed using the new alias _ API and how we can access it using either the client-side object model or through a RESTful programming interface using OData.